Something I hear often from adults and teens alike is consent is so clearly important. So why does it feel so weird? I think one of the reasons consent feels kind of awkward and weird is that we don't have a really solid, unchanging definition for it. Every person I've ever spoken to about consent has felt pretty sure they knew what the word meant, but when I asked for a definition, they found it hard to pin down. We've heard really simple ideas about consent. Yes means yes, for example, and no means no. But what about when your parents tell you to do your homework, or you can't go to the movies with your friends? Are you consenting to do your homework? Is it a type of coercion? It may not be force, but even so, it's also not entirely uninfluenced consent. And sometimes there is an abusive dynamic that goes beyond the usual struggles as teens develop their independence. Some parents and other adults do use force and violence and threats to get people to do what they want. And if you're not sure if you're in an abusive situation, Scarlet Teen is a great place to look into that more. Check the resources section at the end of the book. Where do situations like these fit into the definition of consent? This is going to sound out of left field, but bear with me for a second. I used to feel really sure that I knew what a fish was. Swims in the water, has gills, spawns eggs, has bones. A fish, right? Then I started listening to a podcast called Let's Learn Everything, and I discovered that what is commonly called a fish actually spans several types of aquatic animals, from sharks to manta rays to lampreys to coelacanths. While many fish live in the water, some, like the walking catfish, can spend a significant amount of time out of the water. While many fish have gills and use them to breathe, others, like lungfish, use lungs instead. Fish are often cold-blooded, except for tuna, which are actually warm-blooded. Scientists have a really difficult time making a definition of fish that doesn't end up including some non-fish or leaving out some animals that we would call fish. Then there's the issue of cultural definitions. For example, the Catholic Church used to consider beavers to be fish for the purposes of Lent. They believe in not eating warm-blooded animals during that religious period. The popular, always chilled-out capybara was also a semi-skilled swimmer, and so became classified as a fish for the purposes of religious mealtimes. Capybara is still a popular meal to have during Lent in Venezuela, despite the fact that most people would not consider the largest rodent in the world to be a fish. I think fish is a really good example of how we as humans sometimes believe that our definition of a concept is universal, when it's actually imperfect and incomplete, and maybe always will be. I like to say I think of consent as a living document. My understanding of and relationship to consent is constantly being refined and expanded as I learn new things about myself and how I interact with the world. We all know that rape culture is bad, so therefore, consent culture must be good, right? Yes means yes, and no means no, after all. Why is all of this so complicated? Why isn't there a formulaic solution for these conundrums of how to ascertain consent? There are a lot of reasons for why the conversation around even defining consent, what it impacts and what it doesn't cover, is ongoing and complex. For a start, cultural norms help to shape communication styles. For example, in some cultures, eating everything on your plate is a nonverbal signal that you are still hungry, while in other cultures, if you don't eat everything on your plate, it means you didn't like the meal. No wonder people get their wires crossed. Another factor that can add complexity to this conversation is individualism versus collectivism. In the United States, the idea of personal freedom is considered a core value by many people. In Japan, meanwhile, collectivism and knowing your role as part of a harmonious group is a core value. Both beliefs have some validity, and both have their shortcomings, especially when it comes to consent. While an American person may feel that protecting their personal ability to choose is more important than following the will of a group, a Japanese person may feel their fulfillment of their role as part of a community is more important than individual choice. These two people will likely define consent differently, as they each have a different lens through which they see the world.